Silver Creek Falls State Park in Oregon is home to cabins that vacationing families can rent. In the 1940s, water for the cabins had to be retrieved from a nearby well. Newspapers at the time noted that at least one other disappearance, other than the one we're about to talk about, took place in this same park in earlier years. Betty McCullough, who was 10 years old at this time, suffered from a disability that caused her to be both deaf and mute. She had a short haircut, which could cause her to be mistaken for a boy. On Saturday, June 21st, 1941, Betty was with her family vacationing in a cabin on the park grounds. She got up earlier than her family that day, put on a man's shirt and her sister's shoes, then left her cabin to get a bucket of water from the well. She was never seen again. No search efforts are listed in the book. Herbert Brown disappeared from this area and was never seen again. Perhaps Betty was mistaken for a boy due to her short hair and the men's shirt. The fact that everyone in this chapter is either male or could be mistaken for male is significant. Also of note is the reasons for Betty's family being in the area. They were picking berries. Perhaps berries play some role in her disappearance. Let's quickly review the bullet points. Betty, 10 years old, was missing as of the 21st of June, 1941. She was a deaf-mute. She was vacationing with her family at the time. She could have been mistaken as a male due to her clothing. Please keep these points in mind. We will be addressing each of these and determine if they are accurate statements given the evidence that we're able to dig up on our own. The sources that I use will be cited in the description below. I encourage you to check into my sources as well as do your own research. Don't take anything I or anyone else says at face value. Before we begin, I wanted to share that I contacted the sheriff's department that would have been in charge of this case, but they told me that they don't have any records of this incident at all. Silver Creek Falls State Park was established in 1933 and is referred to on the official park website as the crown jewel of the park system for Oregon. There's a lot to do, and it's a beautiful place to be in. There are numerous waterfalls, canyons, creeks, and the very dense forest. The peak season is October, but the park is open year-round. In the 1940s, the park was already home to numerous youth camps, log cabins, and other programs. The area that we're concerned with was noted to be extremely dense with brush, specifically ferns and tall grass. Betty McCullough was a sickly child who suffered from a range of issues. She was deaf, mute, and suffered from frequent bouts of sudden illness. She was diagnosed to not live longer than her teens. She wore her hair shorter than some other girls, but not in a way that was uncommon for young girls during this time period. Before we begin the retelling in earnest, I want to note that I somewhat doubt the finer details that are given here. They're from an article published in 2006 by the Salem News. I can't find additional sources that match these claims from the 1940s. I will put a star on screen when I make a statement in this retelling that is only mentioned by this one source. On Sunday, June 22nd, Mr. and Mrs. Cullough were migrant workers, currently operating as berry pickers in the Silver Falls Park area. They had left Betty with her siblings in a temporary lodging where they were staying. Around 8 a.m. or shortly after, Betty got up before her siblings and donned a man's shirt, her sister's shoes, and took a bucket outside to get water. She was never seen again. The search lasted for at least 4 days and was noted to be extremely difficult due to the dense brush. Her parents believed that it was possible that she would have accepted a ride from a passing motorist. Even if the motorist has good intentions, she was unable to speak well enough to make herself understood. Betty's relatives were angry that more effort was not put into finding her. They blamed the authorities, claiming that they didn't try hard enough due to the low social status of her family. Herbert's Brown case is so Spartan, it's not even clear that he disappeared from the Silver Creek State Park. As such, in my opinion, it's not possible to draw any significant similarities between these two cases. Betty's haircut was not uncommon for the time or her age, although I do concede that it's possible to have mistaken her for a boy. Though I concede the point, I don't see how it matters. Paulides has a tendency to point things out and say, hey, this is a trend and it's significant. But he refrains from stating why, instead allowing his readers to sort of fill in the blanks with their own imagination. I've talked about the berry picking aspect in the past, but in this case it matters even less. After all, Betty was not the one doing the berry picking, it was her parents. Or, well, maybe Betty was as well. Let's talk about that. The reason why I'm dubious about the claims in the Salem News that I referenced earlier is that nowhere else do I see such fine detail, and I'm curious to know how they were aware of what Betty did and what her intentions were if nobody was around to see it. Everyone was asleep, but somehow we know that she put on a man's shirt, her sister's shoes, and took a bucket to get water from the pump. I realize that those items may be missing from the cabin, but who's to say the shirt wasn't misplaced? Or maybe the bucket wasn't for water. Maybe it was for berries, and Betty left to pick berries to emulate her parents. We can't know for sure, and it's odd to me that these details would only come up more than 60 years after the event. Let's look at the story presented by Missing 411 and see if the points are still valid given the information that I was able to find. Betty, who was 10 years old at the time, went missing on Sunday, June 22nd, 1941, not on the 21st. She was indeed deaf and mute, but also suffered from frequent sudden attacks of illness and was not expected to live much longer. Her family was not vacationing, quite the opposite. They were migrant workers. The search was extremely difficult due to the thick brush and tall grass. It is possible that she was mistaken for a boy, but her haircut was not uncommon for a girl at the time. The main theory floated by her parents is that a motorist picked her up, although it is impossible to say for sure what happened to her. Once again, I'd like to thank my patrons over at patreon.com for their very generous support that allows me to continue making these videos. In particular, I'd like to thank those of the public recognition tier, which include the anonymous user, you know who you are, thank you, as well as Nigel B. So thank you patrons, and thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.